Hello friends, welcome to our channel and hope you're doing well. This time we're back with 3 interesting space updates. We'll start with Super Heavy B7 completing another cryo proof test after major repairs in high bay, followed by Space Jellyfish created by the latest Starlink launch, and we'll wrap up with Chinese concerns on SpaceX Starlink activities with the US military. So let's get started with SpaceX Super Heavy booster B7 returning to the launch pad after major repairs and then carrying out a fresh cryo proof test. Just a few days ago, SpaceX has returned their latest Super Heavy B7 to Starbase's orbital launch site after speedily repairing the damages on the booster that had happened during the first round of testing in the earlier month. As per recent updates, they've carried out another cryo-proof test of the booster. Earlier reports say that B7 was ready for testing by the end of March. It's the first booster that's fitted with a 33-engine puck and the first finished Starship prototype of any kind designed to use new Raptor V2 engines. In early May, it was rolled out to the orbital launch site and mounted on the orbital launch mount. Then, SpaceX teams go for the cryo-proof testing of the booster. The booster fared well in the testing and thus was transferred to a structural test stand that had been installed and modified just a few hundred feet away from the orbital mount. Then, the SpaceX teams go for a qualification testing of B7 on the structural mount. As Booster 7 featured some major design changes, thus it needed extensive qualification testing. The structural stand was outfitted with 13 hydraulic rams to simulate the full thrust of the booster's central Raptor V2 engines. In the second week of April, SpaceX engineers carried out those extensive qualification tests. Though the booster performed well first, it was damaged to a certain extent, which led to the end of the test. Sources state that the damage was caused by operational failure, not by any design flaw. As per reports, it's expected that SpaceX operators may have accidentally closed or opened the wrong valves while draining the booster's transfer tube of liquid oxygen or nitrogen. As the heavy liquid was drained from the tube, a lack of pressure may have created a vacuum and caused the tube to collapse. It was assumed that B7 will not be able to be repaired again, but SpaceX made this possible. On the 6th of May, after completion of major repair works, SpaceX once again brought back B7 to the launch site and installed it on the orbital launch mount for the second time. And not only that, they too carried out another cryo test for the second time. In our next interesting update, we'll talk about the Space Jellyfish created by the latest Starlink launch of SpaceX. SpaceX is not only providing us with flawless launches of rockets or network connectivity, but also their launches often gift us eye-soothing, spectacular visions in the sky during launches. Recently, a similar thing has happened during the last Starlink launch. As per reports, the last and latest Starlink launch has been carried out as usual atop a Falcon 9 rocket on the 6th of May. On that day at 5:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the SpaceX rocket launched about 53 Starlink satellites from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spectacular sight followed after the launch of the rocket while it was going high into the atmosphere. As per reports, Space Coast residents saw a shiny, eerie, glowing cloud as the rocket streaked over the Atlantic Ocean, lighting up the clouds. Chris Combs, a professor of aerodynamics and mechanical engineering at the University of Texas at San Antonio, stated that this phenomenon was a space jellyfish. Many residents caught the picture of that physical phenomenon, and it went viral among SpaceX fans. Sources state that this phenomenon has been created by the combination of Falcon 9's exhaust and the timing of the launch. Reports say that the exhaust exiting the nozzle was underexpanded, meaning the gas was at a higher pressure than the surrounding air, which added to the structure of that phenomenon. Combs wrote on Twitter that, "In underexpanded exhaust, you get expansion fans at the nozzle exit to decrease pressure and match background, jellyfish at high altitude. In an overexpanded exhaust, you get shock waves to increase pressure back up to background, shock diamonds, lower altitude." He also stated that, "Why do we see this? It's a combination of compressible flow physics and perfect timing where the gas is illuminated by light just over the horizon, hinting toward the light of the rising sun, which was very close to the horizon. Other than these, the recent Starlink launch has also marked the 12th launch of that Falcon booster, B-1058, that made a tie with another SpaceX reuse record and successfully landed on one of SpaceX's drone ships. We'll wrap up with an update that deals with China being concerned by SpaceX's connections with the U.S. military to help them attain total space dominance using Starlink. While SpaceX's Starlink constellation is growing rapidly and providing connectivity all around the world, it becomes a major concern for China. Recently, on the 5th of May, a Chinese official news website, China Military Online, which is also affiliated with the Central Military Commission, headed by Xi Jinping, released a report stating their concerns for SpaceX Starlink and the U.S. military. Earlier, also China had raised concerns on Starlink when their space station had 2 near misses with Starlink birds. In the report, the Chinese armed forces advocated that the international community have to be on high alert mode, as there are chances that the U.S. military could potentially use the Starlink constellation for dominating outer space. The report stated that SpaceX has decided to increase the number of Starlink satellites from 12,000 to 42,000. The program's unchecked expansion and the company's ambition to use it for military purposes should put the international community on high alert. In the present context of Ukraine-Russia conflict, the Chinese report highlighted that SpaceX's Starlink constellation is presently helping Ukraine in the war and is the only non-Russian communications system working in quite a good manner. The report also focused on the technical capability of SpaceX, citing the example of jamming of Starlink satellites by Russia, which SpaceX Starlink engineers removed within a couple of hours through an update in the software. Earlier, this work of SpaceX was also appreciated by the Pentagon's Director for Electromagnetic Warfare. Dave Tremper, who's the Director of Electronic Warfare for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, had said then that, "From EW technologist perspective, that's fantastic, and how they did that was eye-watering to me." The Chinese Military Online article draws attention to the fact that SpaceX Starlink is not only providing mere network connectivity in Ukraine, but also it's aiding the Ukrainian armed forces in precision strikes against Russian tanks and positions. The report reads, "In addition to supporting communication, Starlink, as experts estimated, could also interact with UAVs and, using big data and facial recognition technology, might have already played a part in Ukraine's military operations against Russia." While the Chinese report talked on SpaceX capability in Ukraine, they also cited the risk of the SpaceX monopoly in the LEO, limiting the power of other nations. The report says, "Orbital position and frequency are rare strategic resources in space. The LEO can accommodate about 50,000 satellites, over 80% of which would be taken by Starlink, if the program were to launch 42 satellites as it is planned. SpaceX is undertaking an enclosure movement in space to take a vantage position and monopolize strategic resources. Some experts said if SpaceX installs a few root servers in space, it can make Starlink the second independent global internet, which will pose a serious challenge to all countries in defending their cyberspace sovereignty and protecting their information security." Nearly 3 years before, SpaceX had carried out a data transmission test of Starlink with the U.S. Air Force, and it was a huge success. Taking that as an example, the report says, "An unmanned wingman fitted with a Starlink device can serve as a tactical relay platform to transmit data to fighter jets, which means an operator can command a large number of UAVs to carry out tasks at the same time." The Chinese military observers held that the U.S. will use the space as a future battlefield. Thus, they're speeding up to establish the next-generation military communications network based on satellite internet capability. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this. Hit the like button if you find the video interesting, and kindly provide your valuable feedback in the comment section. This will help us to improve.